"I choose the big one," the Lycan King announced, and his next move stunned everyone. Its glow reflected off the obsidian towers, casting long shadows that twisted like living things. The people of the kingdom whispered of the night as if it had a voice, warning those who wandered too far of unseen eyes and hidden dangers. Yet tonight, the kingdom was alive with anticipation, for the Moon Court was to be held, a ceremony that would mark the selection of the Lycan King's mate. Inside the grand hall, walls lined with crimson banners fluttered as servants moved like shadows across polished stone floors. The scent of burning candles and incense mingled, carrying a weight of age-old tradition and secrets too heavy for words. Nobles in embroidered silks whispered among themselves, eyes flicking nervously toward the throne. All awaited the announcement. All awaited the king, and the king was late. When he finally appeared, the room fell into a silence so complete it seemed to swallow every footstep he took. His presence was commanding, yet unnerving. He was tall, broader than any human could imagine, with eyes that glimmered like amber flames in the dark. His hair, black as the night itself, fell in waves over his shoulders. But it was the aura around him that drew every gaze, the mix of danger, sorrow, and authority that made even the boldest nobles falter. The king's eyes scanned the hall with quiet command before landing on the gathered crowd. Every noble's breath caught, every heart trembled, for he held the power of life and death in a single glance. "I choose the big one," he announced, his voice low, steady, and impossible to ignore. The words hung in the air, and for a moment confusion and murmurs rippled through the hall. Whispers spread like wildfire. The king had never spoken of the big one before. Who could it be? Surely not among these timid, carefully chosen nobles. Surely not among the humans who trembled at the mere thought of the king's wrath. Then the doors of the hall swung open and she entered. Ilara. She moved with cautious grace, her cloak trailing behind her like a shadow. Her hair, the color of autumn wheat, caught the moonlight, and her eyes, wide and uncertain, held the storm of her thoughts. She was no noble. She was human, of a lineage that had once ruled a kingdom now crumbled under Lycan claws and ancient grudges. And yet tonight, she walked toward a destiny she had never imagined. Every step she took echoed through the hall, and every eye followed her. Some were full of fear, some of curiosity, and some hidden behind polite masks of envy. She tried to ignore them, focusing only on the throne at the far end of the room. The Lycan King did not rise. He merely watched, and the silence of his gaze pressed against her chest like a heavy stone. It was not cruelty that weighed upon her. It was something more dangerous: curiosity, expectation, and a strange, unspoken longing. "Step forward," he commanded. His voice was smooth, but it carried the weight of iron. Ilara's heart thundered in her chest. She had expected fear, humiliation, perhaps even anger, but she had not expected the magnetism that pulled at her with each step she took closer. The closer she got, the more she sensed a life behind those amber eyes, a life shaped by pain, power, and solitude. She finally stopped a few feet from the throne, and the king studied her in silence. The court watched with bated breath, and she could feel their judgment pressing down. She bowed her head as tradition demanded, but when she looked up again, their eyes met. "You are the one I choose," the king said, his voice softer now, though no less commanding. "Not for your status, not for your lineage, but for the soul you carry, for the courage that flows in your veins. You are the big one." The hall seemed to fall into a hush, and then whispers erupted again. Some nobles gasped, others frowned, muttering about the audacity of a human mate for the Lycan King. Yet Ilara felt only the pulse of destiny thrumming in her chest. She had thought herself a survivor, someone who hid from the world and from the blood of the Lycans who had destroyed her home. But now, standing before the king, she realized she had been something more all along, a spark of life that could challenge even the darkest shadows. I do not understand," she whispered, her voice trembling. She had imagined many fates, but never this. "You will," he said, his amber eyes flickering with something she could not name. "And you will choose whether to walk with me willingly, or let the darkness consume both of us." Alara's knees shook, and she felt the weight of the court's gaze like an invisible hand pressing against her back. She wanted to run, to hide, to refuse. Yet something inside her stirred, a strange, unshakable courage that drew her forward. "Then I will walk with you," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "if you will have me." The king inclined his head slightly, a gesture of approval, though his expression remained unreadable. The tension in the room was palpable. The courtiers looked at each other, wondering how the human girl could possibly survive in a world of Lycans and dark magic. And perhaps the king himself wondered the same. For a moment the hall seemed to hold its breath, and then the king rose from the throne, moving closer to her. He did not touch her, but the space between them seemed to hum with energy. Alara could feel it, a pulse that was not her own, a vibration that seemed to echo through her very bones. "You carry a power within you," he said quietly, "a power you do not yet understand. Tonight it wakes." The words were a mystery, a promise, and a warning all at once. Alara's heart raced. She had known of her lineage, the whispers of magic that lingered in her blood, but she had never felt it stir so strongly. And yet it was not fear that gripped her, it was curiosity and something deeper, something she dared not name. The king extended his hand not as a command but as an offer. "Come with me," he said, "and see what destiny truly holds." Alara hesitated, caught between instinct and desire. Every step forward was a step into the unknown, into a world of shadows, power, and ancient curses. Yet something in the king's gaze told her that she was not alone, that whatever lay ahead they would face it together. She took his hand. The touch was electrifying, though gentle, like a spark that had waited centuries to ignite. The king's eyes softened just enough for her to glimpse the boy he had once been, the boy who had loved freely and lost everything to power and betrayal. The court erupted into whispers again, but Alara did not hear them. She felt only the pull of destiny, the thrill of standing beside someone both terrifying and magnetic, someone who carried darkness and light in equal measure. Together, they moved toward the balcony, where the moon hung low and full. Below, the forest whispered, and the wind carried the scent of wildflowers and danger alike. The king paused, letting Alara gaze out at the kingdom he ruled with both strength and sorrow. "This land is yours, too," he said softly, "if you choose to claim it with me." Alara's hand tightened around his. She did not yet understand the full weight of what she had agreed to, the trials that awaited her, or the darkness that clung to the king like a second skin. But she did understand one thing. She had been chosen, and the choice was hers to honor. As the moonlight spilled over them, casting their shadows long and intertwined, the king spoke again. "There are those who will wish to see you fall. There are those who will see your courage as weakness. But you are the big one, and I have chosen you because only you can walk beside me in both shadow and light." Alara swallowed, feeling a mixture of fear and exhilaration. The court below them murmured, uncertain and envious, but she felt the pulse of destiny in her veins. She had been chosen not for beauty, not for rank, not for submission, but for courage, strength, and the fire that lived within her. For the first time in her life she felt fully seen, and the king, for the first time in many long years, allowed himself to hope. But as they stood there, hand in hand, something stirred in the forest beyond the castle walls. A faint rustle, a shadow moving in the moonlight. The air shifted, carrying a sense of warning, a promise that destiny rarely came without danger. Alara sensed it before she saw it. The pulse in her veins quickened. The world of Lycans, curses, and dark power she had stepped into was far from safe. And yet she would not turn back. Not now, not ever. The king looked down at her, amber eyes reflecting the moonlight, and for a brief, fleeting moment she saw everything he had lost and everything he could still hope to find. "I choose you," he said again, a whisper meant only for her. And for the first time, Alara truly believed it. The moon shone brighter as if witnessing the beginning of a legend. But the whispers of the forest were not idle. Something ancient had noticed. Something patient and hungry. And the journey had only just begun. The castle was quieter at night than during the ceremony, but the quiet held its own weight, a watchful stillness that made the shadows seem alive. Torches flickered along the walls, casting trembling light across tapestries depicting the kingdom's history. Battles, kings, queens, and legends now forgotten. In the heart of the castle, the Lycan king moved silently through the corridors, his steps echoing like distant thunder. Alara followed him, hesitant but determined. The grandeur of the castle, the history engraved in every stone, only made her feel smaller. Yet despite the fear, a strange thrill ran through her veins. She had accepted her place beside him, yet the path forward was unknown, and that uncertainty was both terrifying and exhilarating. "You do not need to walk behind me," the king said without turning. His voice was quiet but firm, carrying a weight that made her stop mid-step. I am not afraid," she answered, though her voice trembled slightly. I want to understand." He finally turned, his amber eyes glowing in the dim light, and studied her for a long moment. There was curiosity there, mingled with a caution she could not quite read. "Understanding comes with time," he said slowly, "and with danger. You will see that soon enough." They reached the balcony overlooking the forest. Below, the moonlight kissed the treetops, and the wind carried the scent of pine and wet earth. The king leaned on the stone railing, his gaze lost in the darkness beyond. Alara joined him, her hand brushing against his, a contact electric yet comforting. "The court will not accept this," she whispered. "A human chosen by a Lycan king. They will question your judgment, even your sanity." He did not respond immediately. Instead, he turned his gaze toward her, and in that look was something she had not expected: vulnerability. It was fleeting, gone as quickly as it appeared, but she caught it. "I have ruled this kingdom for many years," he said, his voice softer now, almost regretful. "And yet I have never been free, not truly. I chose you because you might give me that freedom if you are willing to face what lies ahead." Alara's heart raced. Freedom. The word seemed too simple for what he meant, yet she felt it deep in her chest. She had lived her life hiding, avoiding danger, keeping herself small so the shadows would not notice her. And yet, here she was, standing beside the most feared creature in the kingdom, chosen for something she barely understood in herself. "I will face it," she said, her voice firm though her hands trembled slightly. "Whatever comes." A faint smile brushed across the king's lips, almost imperceptible. "Courage is rare," he said, "and it is dangerous." They stood together in silence for a time, the wind carrying whispers from the forest. Alara's thoughts wandered to the prophecy she had once heard in stories from her family. The one who walks beside the cursed shall either break or bind the curse forever. Could this be what it meant? She looked at the king, and for the first time she wondered if she was truly ready for such a destiny. Suddenly, a sound broke the quiet. Footsteps, soft but deliberate, echoed from the corridor behind them. Both of them tensed. The king's posture shifted, alert and commanding, while Alara instinctively stepped closer to him. "It is nothing," he said after a moment, though his eyes scanned the shadows. "Most threats are not visible to the untrained eye." Alara's pulse quickened. She had always been cautious around people, but this world of Lycans and power was different. Danger was not distant here. It was alive, breathing, and waiting. And yet she felt no fear when she looked at the king. Only trust. "Tell me about the curse," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why do you speak of danger and freedom as if they are tied to your soul?" The king's amber eyes darkened, as if recalling memories he preferred to bury. "Long ago I was betrayed," he began, his voice low and steady. "By those I trusted most. They bound me with blood magic to this throne, to this kingdom. My strength, my life, my very soul, all tied to their betrayal. I have ruled, yes, but only as a shadow of myself. The darkness inside me is a part of me, but it is also a cage. And you may hold the key to unlocking it." Alara listened, fascinated despite the chill creeping along her spine. There was pain in his words, a history heavy with regret. Yet beneath it all there was longing for connection, for understanding, for someone who could see him as he truly was. "Why me?" she asked, her voice steady now, more curious than fearful. "There are many in this kingdom, many who would do anything to gain your favor. Why choose me?" He looked at her, and for a long moment the silence spoke louder than words. "Because," he said finally, "you do not fear me. You see me, not the monster others imagine. You see what I have lost and what I might become. That courage, that honesty is rare. It is why I chose you." Alara felt warmth spread through her chest. She had never imagined anyone could see her for what she was, for the mix of strength and uncertainty she carried. And yet, here was the king, telling her she was not only seen but needed. A sudden rustle in the trees below made them both glance outward. The forest was alive, and the shadows moved as if breathing. The king's senses sharpened instantly, every muscle coiled, every instinct alert. Alara realized then that the king's power was not just in strength, it was in awareness, in a connection to the world that went far beyond ordinary sight or hearing. "What is it?" she whispered, her hand finding his. "Nothing yet," he replied, though his tone carried a warning. "But the forest watches, it knows, and it will test us." Alara felt a shiver, not of fear but of anticipation. She had chosen this path. She had stepped into a world of shadows and power, and now she felt the pulse of that world surrounding her, touching her, awakening something inside her she had never known. The king stepped closer to her, his presence overwhelming and grounding at once. "You must learn to trust not only me," he said, "but also yourself. The power you carry within is stronger than you know, and if we are to face what is coming, you will need every ounce of it." Her heart raced, power within her. She had always believed herself ordinary, a survivor of a fallen kingdom, a girl who hid her magic to avoid attention. But standing here, under the moonlight with the king beside her, she felt that magic stir. A faint warmth spread through her fingertips, a sensation she could not yet name. The king noticed. "Yes," he said, a note of approval in his voice. "It wakes because you have chosen. That choice is what grants it strength." Alara's mind swirled with wonder and fear. She had always feared her own abilities, feared the responsibility they carried. But now, guided by the king, she felt a new possibility, an opportunity to not only face her fears but to wield them for something greater. "I am ready," she said softly, though her heart pounded in her chest. "I will learn, I will face whatever comes." The king's expression softened, but only for a fleeting moment. "Good," he said, "because the dangers ahead will not wait for courage to catch up. And some will seek to use your fear against you. But fear is not weakness, Alara. Fear is a signal. It tells you where to stand, where to fight, where to survive." The wind picked up, rustling the leaves in the forest below. Shadows shifted in the moonlight, hinting at movement, at life hidden among the trees. Alara sensed it, an awareness she had never felt before. The forest was alive, and it was watching them, watching her. She turned to the king, her voice firm. "Whatever comes, I will not run. Not from this, not from you, not from myself." He studied her, his amber eyes glimmering with a mix of respect, pride, and something more subtle, something that stirred in the space between them, unspoken yet undeniable. "Then we begin," he said, "and may the moon guide us both." Together they stepped back from the balcony, the night around them heavy with possibility. Danger waited, yes, but so did discovery, and perhaps even redemption. For the first time, Alara felt that she was not merely surviving, but walking toward a destiny she could shape alongside the king. As they moved through the shadowed halls, the castle seemed to pulse around them. Portraits of long-dead kings and queens watched silently, torches flickered like sentinels, and the walls themselves seemed to hum with history. Every corner held secrets, and every shadow promised trials yet to come. Alara felt both fear and exhilaration, a mixture she had never known, and she realized that this, standing beside the Lycan king, facing unknown dangers and ancient power, was only the beginning. For outside the castle walls, something stirred in the dark forest. Eyes glimmered in the shadows, unseen yet intent, as if the very night itself had noticed the awakening of a power long dormant. And the king, ever vigilant, sensed it too. "The night watches," he murmured, "and so must we." Alara nodded, her hand brushing against his. In that small contact, she felt a bond forming, delicate yet strong, fragile yet enduring. And she understood for the first time that the darkness they faced would not only test their strength but also their hearts. The moon hung low, full and brilliant, casting silver light on two figures standing together, ready to face the unknown. And the shadows waited, patient and hungry. The days following the moon court were filled with whispers, shadows, and unease. The Lycan kingdom, usually steadfast under the king's rule, now trembled with uncertainty. Courtiers and nobles exchanged cautious glances, some openly questioning the king's choice, others plotting in secret. The selection of a human mate was unprecedented, and many saw it as a threat to tradition, a fracture in the very foundation of power. Alara moved through the castle cautiously, aware of every glance and hushed conversation. She had expected fear, even envy, but not the cold calculation of those who had long ruled in whispers. Some tried to dismiss her as naive, unprepared for a world she could barely imagine. Yet with each passing day, she felt herself growing stronger, not just in courage but in understanding. The king had chosen her not for her rank or beauty, but because she had a strength hidden beneath the fear, a light that could pierce even the deepest darkness. The king, however, remained distant at times, a storm behind amber eyes that no human could easily read. He spent hours in his private chambers, pacing, listening to the castle, sensing every shift in the wind, every change in the shadows. Alara had begun to see glimpses of his solitude, moments where the weight of power, history, and curse pressed down on him so heavily that even he could not hide it. "You must learn to move among them," he said one evening, his voice quiet but firm as they walked through the torchlit corridors. "The court will test you. They will search for weakness and they will try to turn others against you. You cannot falter, not even once." Alara nodded, determination and fear mingling in her chest. "I will not falter," she replied. "But what if they succeed?" The king's gaze was steady, unwavering. "Then you will rise above. That is the choice you have made. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to face it, again and again." They arrived at the training hall, a vast chamber of polished stone, weapons lining the walls like silent guardians. Here, the king trained not only his warriors but also those he chose to trust, those he considered capable of standing beside him in battle. Tonight, it was Alara's turn. "You must learn to defend yourself," he said, picking up a wooden practice sword. His movements were precise, almost fluid, a dance of power and control. "Not because you will need it against me, but because the world will not always wait for mercy." Alara lifted her own weapon, her fingers trembling slightly around the hilt. She had never trained with a sword before, but she had learned quickly in the days since the moon court, following the king's subtle instructions. He was patient yet demanding, pushing her beyond what she thought possible. "You hesitate," he said, circling her like a predator observing prey. "Fear is natural, use it. Do not let it control you." Their blades met with a clatter, sparks of wood flying in the dim light. Alara's heart pounded, but she began to see the rhythm, the dance within the fight. Every movement of the king's sword was a lesson, a story, a warning. And yet beneath the power and danger there was a connection forming, a silent communication that spoke louder than words. "You are stronger than you know," he said, blocking her strike effortlessly. And yet, you must learn to trust not only your strength but your instinct. Hours passed as they sparred, sweat and determination mingling. When they finally lowered their swords, Alara's chest heaved, her arms trembling with exhaustion. But the king's gaze was approving, a rare softness in the amber fire of his eyes. "You have learned well," he said, "but do not mistake skill for wisdom. The true test is not here with swords and walls. It is out there." He gestured toward the castle gates and the dark forest beyond. "It is in the world that watches and waits for you to falter." The next day, the tension in the court escalated. A council was convened to address the king's unprecedented choice. Nobles argued, raised voices echoing through the chamber, questioning his judgment, his legacy, and even the stability of the kingdom itself. Alara stood beside the king, her hands clasped, her heart steady despite the words hurled around them. Some looked at her with scorn, others with fear, yet she remained composed. She had learned in the days since the Moon Court that presence could be as powerful as a sword and courage as sharp as steel. One noble, a tall man with a face carved from arrogance, stepped forward. "Your Majesty, a human cannot lead, cannot rule beside you. This choice undermines the strength of our kingdom and dishonors the traditions that have preserved it for centuries." The king's gaze was icy, and the hall fell silent. "It is not tradition that preserves a kingdom," he said slowly, every word deliberate. "It is courage, loyalty, and the willingness to embrace what is right, even when it is feared." The council erupted again, but Alara remained calm, her gaze fixed on the king. She felt a strange bond in that moment, a connection forged not only by destiny but by the challenges they faced together. She understood, perhaps for the first time, that standing beside him was not about fear or fascination. It was about trust, respect, and the shared burden of a crown heavy with history. Later, in the quiet of the castle, Alara walked with the king through the forest that surrounded the kingdom. The moonlight filtered through the trees, silver and soft, casting patterns on the ground that shifted like water. The forest seemed alive, whispering as if aware of their presence. "You sense it, don't you?" the king asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Alara nodded. "The forest, it watches, it feels. I have never felt anything like it." He stopped and turned to her, his amber eyes reflecting the moonlight. "The forest, the kingdom, even the people, they all respond to power. Not only to strength, but to courage and truth. And now you carry that power within yourself. That is why you were chosen." She looked at him, a mixture of awe and apprehension in her eyes. "I feel it, but it scares me." "That is natural," he said. "Fear does not make you weak. It shows where you are alive, where you are human, where you are capable of choice. And choice is everything." As they moved deeper into the forest, a sudden movement caught their attention. Shadows shifted unnaturally among the trees, and a chill ran down Alara's spine. The king's posture stiffened, muscles coiling like a spring ready to strike. "Stay close," he warned. Before Alara could respond, a figure emerged from the shadows, a warrior, masked and armed, moving with deadly precision. The king stepped forward instantly, protective and commanding, and Alara's instincts flared. She reached for her own weapon, her hands steady now, heart racing with purpose rather than fear. The figure attacked, striking with a speed and skill that tested both of them. The king deflected the blows effortlessly, each movement calculated, powerful, and precise. Alara followed his lead, her sword a reflection of his rhythm, her confidence growing with each step. "You have improved," the king said mid-fight, a rare note of approval in his voice. "Good, but remember, skill without awareness is nothing. Watch, feel, anticipate." Together they fought as one, movement synchronized, a dance of trust and power. Finally, the figure retreated into the shadows, leaving only the rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. Alara's breath came in heavy gasps, but she felt exhilaration, not fear. She had faced danger, stood beside the king, and survived. More than that, she had learned that her courage and instincts could matter in ways she had never imagined. The king turned to her, his gaze intense. "You have done well, but remember this was only the beginning. There will be others who will test you, who will not retreat so easily." Alara nodded, a sense of determination settling within her. "I understand," she said. "I will not falter." The king's expression softened just enough for a hint of warmth to show. "Good. Because soon the true test will come, not from outsiders but from within, from the shadows we carry and the truths we hide from ourselves." As they walked back to the castle, the forest behind them seemed to settle, though the whispers of movement lingered in the air. Alara felt the pulse of destiny in every leaf, every shadow, every rustle of the wind. She understood that power was not just in the sword or the magic she carried, but in courage, trust, and the choices she made. Back in the castle, the council continued their schemes, whispers of rebellion growing louder. Yet, Alara no longer felt like a pawn in their game. She had begun to understand the rhythm of the king's world, the dance of power and the strength required to survive, and perhaps even thrive, beside him. The king watched her as she moved through the halls, and for the first time he allowed himself a rare thought. She might not only survive this world, but she might change it. And perhaps, in doing so, they could both find the freedom they had long sought. But as the night deepened, a new shadow moved through the kingdom, a presence ancient and patient, watching the king and the human he had chosen. The test had only begun, and neither of them fully understood the dangers yet to come. And so the fractured throne awaited its destiny, while two hearts, bound by choice and courage, prepared to face the shadows together. The first light of dawn barely touched the edges of the castle towers, but the Lycan king was already awake, standing in the highest chamber. His amber eyes reflected the faint glow of the rising sun, yet there was still a shadow in them, a shadow born of centuries of power, loss, and betrayal. He had faced countless threats before, yet none had weighed as heavily as the presence of something ancient, patient, and hungry that now stirred in the kingdom. Alara approached quietly, her steps soft on the polished stone floor. She had slept little, her mind full of images from the past few days. The council's whispers, the training sessions, the forest's eerie shadows, and the constant tension of standing beside a king whose world was unlike any she had known. Yet despite exhaustion, she felt a spark of determination. She would not run, she would not falter, not now. "You have not slept," the king said without turning, his voice low but steady, "and soon you will need every ounce of your strength." "I could not," she replied softly, moving to stand beside him. "The night was too full of questions, and the forest, it speaks in ways I cannot yet understand." He glanced at her then, a flicker of warmth crossing his otherwise stern features. "It is alive," he said. "And it watches, but more importantly, it tests us. It has been waiting for this moment, for centuries perhaps, for one who could face what lies ahead." Alara's heart quickened. She had begun to sense it herself, a presence in the shadows, a pulse of ancient energy that seemed to ripple through the land. It was no ordinary threat. It was something bound to the king's soul, something that had not yet been faced. "The prophecy," she said quietly, almost to herself. "It was true. What it spoke of, it is here." The king's expression darkened. "Yes, and it will not yield easily. We must face it together, or it will consume more than just the kingdom. It will consume us." They left the chamber, moving silently through the castle corridors. Guards and servants stared, sensing the weight of purpose that radiated from the king and the human beside him. Some whispered about destiny and courage, others about fear and danger. Yet Alara felt none of the fear they projected. She felt focus, determination, and a strange, unshakable connection to the king and the world he protected. Outside the castle, the forest waited. Shadows twisted and flickered in the early light, and the wind carried a chill that spoke of ancient power. The king's steps were deliberate, his senses alert, every movement precise and commanding. Alara followed closely, her own senses heightened, her mind aware of the subtle movements of the shadows around them. "You must trust yourself," the king said as they approached the edge of the trees, "and you must trust me. For what comes next will not be fought with strength alone. It will require courage, trust, and the willingness to face the truth of our hearts." Alara nodded. "I trust you," she said, and in that moment she understood the full meaning of the king's words. Trust was not only about survival, it was about choosing to face the darkness together and to confront the shadows that lived within themselves. The forest before them seemed to shift, growing darker, heavier, as if sensing their presence. Then without warning a figure emerged, a spirit bound in ancient magic, its form flickering like smoke and shadow. Its voice was a hiss, soft but filled with malice. "King of Lycans," it said, "you have dared to challenge me, and you human have dared to bind your fate to his. You are both mine to test." The king stepped forward, every muscle tense, a growl rumbling low in his chest. "You have no power over me," he said firmly, "and no power over her." The spirit laughed, a sound that echoed like wind through empty halls. "You are bound by your own past, by the blood that curses you. And you human carry the spark of destiny, but can it withstand the shadows of centuries?" Alara's heart pounded, but she held her ground. She felt the pulse of magic within her stir, responding to the challenge, responding to the king. "I am not afraid," she said, "and I will stand with him." The king's eyes met hers, amber and alive with unspoken emotions. In that moment there was no fear, no doubt. Only trust, courage, and a bond forged in destiny. The spirit attacked, shifting through the shadows with incredible speed, striking at them with tendrils of dark energy. The king moved first, blocking and countering with strength and precision. Alara followed, using her own emerging magic to shield them both, a shimmering force that rippled from her hands and danced through the forest air. "You are stronger than I thought," the spirit hissed, recoiling slightly from the power she wielded. "But courage alone is not enough." The king advanced, his voice steady and commanding. "It is enough when combined with trust, and we have both." Together they fought. The king's power, raw and formidable, met the spirit's attacks with precision and force. Alara's magic intertwined with his strength, forming a protective and offensive rhythm that neither had known they could achieve alone. The spirit faltered, retreating, then surged again, but the unity of the king and the human beside him proved stronger. "You cannot defeat us," Alara said, her voice ringing with confidence. "Not together." The spirit shrieked, a sound like breaking glass, and in a final attempt, unleashed a wave of darkness meant to overwhelm them. But the king stepped forward, placing a hand on Alara's shoulder, drawing her energy into his own. They moved as one, the bond between them amplifying their strength. Light erupted from within them, a radiant force that tore through the shadows, shattering the spirit into fragments of mist that scattered across the forest. The wind stilled, the forest seemed to exhale, and the first rays of sunlight broke through the trees, bathing them in warmth. Alara fell to her knees, exhausted but triumphant. The king knelt beside her, his hand brushing her hair back gently. "You were magnificent," he said softly. "Your courage, your power, it saved us both." Tears filled her eyes, not from fear but from relief and the weight of everything they had faced. "We did it together," she said. "We faced it together." He nodded, amber eyes softening, a rare vulnerability showing through the strength he always displayed. "Yes, together," he said. "And that is why you are the big one. Not because of magic, not because of skill, but because of courage, trust, and heart." The forest around them seemed to hum, alive with the new balance that had been forged. Shadows no longer clung as tightly, and the air felt lighter, freer. The danger had passed for now. Alara stood, brushing the dirt from her cloak. The king extended a hand to her, and she took it without hesitation. The connection between them, forged in trials and trust, felt unbreakable. She had faced the darkness, embraced it, and emerged not just alive, but stronger than she had ever imagined. "You have changed me," the king said quietly, his gaze meeting hers. "Not just the kingdom, not just the forest, but me." Alara smiled, a soft, radiant smile that carried relief, pride, and love. "And you have changed me," she replied. "You've shown me that courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to face it." They walked back toward the castle, the forest bathed in morning light. The birds sang, the wind carried the scent of wildflowers, and the castle towers gleamed like silver in the dawn. The kingdom itself seemed to breathe easier, as if recognizing the shift in power, not through fear, but through unity, trust, and courage. Inside the castle, the courtiers whispered again, but this time with respect and awe. The king and Alara had faced what no one had dared confront, and they had emerged victorious. The whispers spoke of destiny, courage, and a bond that could not be broken. That evening, the king and Alara stood on the balcony once more, watching the moon rise over the forest. It was full, bright, and calm, a mirror to the peace they had fought to achieve. "You have brought light to shadows I thought would never end," the king said softly, his hand brushing hers. "And I see a future I dared not hope for." Alara leaned slightly toward him, her hand remaining in his. "Then we face it together," she said. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." The king nodded, amber eyes reflecting the moonlight and the warmth of dawn. "Together," he repeated, and for the first time in centuries, he allowed himself to feel hope. Not fear, not anger, not regret, but hope. And as the moon shone down, the Lycan king and the human beside him understood that their bond was more than destiny. It was courage, trust, and love forged in darkness, tempered by trials and strengthened by their shared will. The kingdom slept peacefully, unaware that the greatest threat had been faced and overcome. Yet in the shadows of the forest, ancient whispers promised that new challenges would come, as they always did. But for now, the king and Alara had found redemption, not only for themselves but for the land they protected. Hand in hand, they turned from the balcony, walking together into a future neither fully understood, yet both were ready to embrace. The moon's glow lingered on the castle, silver and watchful, as if marking the beginning of a legend that would be whispered for generations. A tale of courage, trust, and love that could face the darkest shadows and emerge victorious. And in that moment, the Lycan king and Alara knew that, no matter what awaited them, they would never face it alone.